The hosts feel it would be a little unkind to present this podcast without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the two great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now's your chance to. Well, we've warned you. Hello, and welcome once again to the Frankencast. I'm the mad scientist, Anthony Bowman. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm joined this week by...
the professor, David Ullman. My pronouns are also he, him.
Yeah, so we've got a new co-host. We're gonna, obviously as time has gone on, we're kind of doing some rotating stuff, and David just reached out to me recently, and we've been talking, and it sounded like a good fit. It sounded like fun. So I'm really excited to talk more about Frankenstein. I mean, that's the dream of this podcast, is to talk about Frankenstein with as many people as possible. And so here we are. Actually, before we get into the movie we're here to talk about, usually when we have somebody new on, I like to ask, why Frankenstein? So, we've talked a little bit offline. Like, I know you're a big fan and have been for a long time, but I guess I don't really know what drew you to Frankenstein. What is it about the story that has captured your attention for so long?
I've given that a fair amount of thought over my life, entering my late 40s now, which, is the first time I said that out loud. Don't love that. But I grew up a kid in the 80s, and Frankenstein was just kind of like the Universal monsters were just everywhere, at that time. And so they were kind of ubiquitous, and I latched on at a certain point. But over the years, as it's become more and more important to me, I have considered this and a lot. So I have maybe a more, obnoxious answer than some. But I think for me, it's all the obvious things about the outsider thing. But it's also, I think for me as a creative person, I also relate to both the creature and the creator, both Victor and the creature, to where like I can totally relate to being obsessed with your work and trying to create something out of nothing. I'm a filmmaker and I've been a musician as well. And yeah, that can be all consuming in ways that are not always healthy. And then of course, just as like a kind of a misunderstood person, or at least you sort of feel that way, and kind of outcast for having strange interests like Frankenstein, or if they're perhaps as pronounced as my interest in Frankenstein, and other sort of macabre and odd things from the small Midwestern town that I'm from. But I think that's at the heart of it, is that I relate to both of the main characters, and the themes are something that I find myself thinking about often. It's far and away my favorite book, and I am obsessed with film adaptations, and sort of have one in me as well that maybe someday I'll get a chance to realize.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the creator and creation thing is interesting. Like, I feel like when I started this podcast, I was very much like, I felt like I related to the monster. That was the main thing that drew me in. But like, I feel like I've, talked to many creative people on the podcast over the years. And a lot of, I hear, relating to Victor or Henry or, Frankenstein, the doctor, more and more. And like, I feel like, pulling back the curtain a little bit, we do the little intro where I'm the mad scientist. And like, initially when Eric and I like started the podcast, it was like, we initially thought like, every week we'll both just pick a thing, make a reference to whatever in the movie. And like, we had recorded, I think, 5 or 6 before we actually released them. And as we started doing them, it was like, oh no, this is the format. This is like me kind of running the show, being the guy who came up with the podcast or whatever. Like, I am the mad scientist. I'm running this. And then like everything else is sort of, it's I feel like I've kind of shifted perspective from like the Universal films where like the monster is the central figure to like the Hammer films where it's Peter Cushing as Victor, and so yeah, I feel like seeing myself that way in this role has been like sort of a positive. Like I still very much relate to the monster, the sympathetic creature who is misunderstood and doesn't understand why his creator is abandoned. These things all resonate super hard with me, but I do feel like I think it's healthy. Obviously Victor is a flawed character in a lot of ways, but I think for me it's been a healthy journey towards seeing myself more as the creator than the creation. But yeah, especially I know for you, like as we were talking, like you've done a lot of creative stuff over the years. Like I was actually familiar with your work before we talked.
More than blew my mind. We haven't talked too much about that, but there's some things I want to know offline or whatever. I just can't believe that. It's such a small world.
Yeah, it is. It's funny. But yeah, and obviously we'll definitely like talk about, we can plug work you in the past and in the future and whatever, like as we go further. But yeah, like I think that it's interesting kind of looking at the story more as a creator. And so yeah, I definitely relate there, and I think that maybe takes us to should we get into the actual movie we're here to talk about? So it's funny, like this movie has been on like the Frankencast list since day one when I put together the original spreadsheet, but I kept like, I think I've actually deleted it and added it back a couple of times because this movie is a documentary about Frankenstein, and I just, as we started doing the podcast and kind of finding the format of like, okay, we're going through the plot scene by scene and like analyzing the themes that occur in that, and then we get to the end and sort of, bring it all together and stuff. And I just kept thinking, like, does a documentary about Frankenstein, does it have enough meat for us to do what we do here? And so I've just been like perseverating about it for years now. There's a couple other documentaries that I also have, and we'll see how this one goes. Maybe we'll add do the others eventually as well. But like, so when we started talking and you were like, you gave me a list of a couple movies you were interested in talking about, I was like, well, if you've got feelings about this, this is probably the time and place to do this one. And it also may be a good one to like introduce you to the show and everything. Cause obviously we'll be able to talk about a lot of movies that the Frankencast has covered years ago that are discussed in this documentary. So I thought that might be fun for you as well. But I'm also just curious to see, like, obviously you only listed 5 movies and this was on there. So I feel like you definitely have thoughts about this, that it must be special to you in some way. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, when I found the podcast, which I can't remember what led me to it. I wish I knew that to share that with you, so how some of your listeners are coming to you. But it's funny because I feel like I had the experience that I guess as a listener I'm glad you didn't have, which is I wanted to just hear people talk about Frankenstein for hours on end. And so in doing a search, I found that, whereas as I understand it for you, like you didn't find that, so you had to make it. And awfully glad that was the case for you, but also glad for me that not only could I find folks to hear expound upon my favorite book and films, and but I would now to be able to be a part of it's really special. So thank you for that. And as I was going through the movies that you had covered and kind of picking out the ones that I was most interested in at first, once I started to think like, I want to get in on this, I started to look through and like, okay, which ones haven't been covered in the hundreds of episodes? And this was among them. And I had also recently thought about this documentary, like in the last like 2 or 3 months. So I'm actually not literally a professor. I do work for a university as a video producer. But when I was a kid, in I loved Frankenstein so much. It was among my first attempts at filmmaking, was just having my dad follow me around the video camera as I reenacted the 1931 film, and had my brother play the Fritz, and we would take turns playing the roles. I think you had to be super familiar with the beats of that movie to have any idea what was happening in our 1988, pre-adolescent remake is a generous word, but in any event, because of that, my dad would call me the professor, because I liked to I would put on karate pajamas, the white, like a gi, and that would be my lab coat and stuff. Okay. I'd pretend to do things in the primary bathroom on the end of the house that I would pretend is my laboratory and stuff. So that nickname kind of does actually have an origin in my youth, but I continued to make films as I was able, working at cable access centers and stuff as a kid and teenager. And eventually I was an English major for a while, and a strange winding road through college, but I was an English major for a while, and I was literally 25 working nights at a factory and barely sleeping and going to school during the day. And I think I was realizing that in order to do well in this major, I would really have to learn my professors and kind of cater to them. I had these two diametrically opposed. One was all theory and you apply a feminist or postmodern thing to a text, and the other was all freewheeling. And I was I just want to write a dissertation on Frankenstein. Is all this worth it? So I switched my major ultimately to what I was already familiar with, which is filmmaking, which is a long way of getting around to I am, I guess, by discipline in filmmaking, most often a documentary filmmaker. And this is one of the first documentaries that I fell in love with when it came out on TV in, I think, 1994. And I think about it all the time, both because I think it really solidified my love. I think it transitioned my love from my childhood love of Frankenstein to my late adolescence and lifelong affection and fascination for and with it. And I thought of it recently because I've been working on this documentary project, this personal documentary, for 11 years. It's, as we're talking about it today, it's in a sound mixing stage, and it's been the hardest thing I've ever done, and it's taken the longest, and a lot of that is in the edit. And I just kept hearing this quote from Gene Wilder that comes from this documentary, where he talks about an experience during the making of Young Frankenstein, where Mel Brooks gets up and he pounds his head on the wall after watching the first 20-minute cut of the creation scene as they sort of ascend up into the top of the laboratory and stuff. And he talks about Mel Brooks gave this speech about how after such a week or two, it's going to be an 8-minute, still pretty bad scene, and eventually it'll get to a 2-minute masterpiece or something like that. I can't remember the math of it, but I so often thought about this quote and wanted it for inspiration that I dug up my obviously it's just audio only, but I thought I'd hold up for you my VHS copy of it, that I dug it up, I transferred it to DVD, and I ripped it to the thing, and I excerpted that scene just so I could watch it when I was frustrated, in the early mornings when I'm edited or whatever, just get a little inspiration. And then rewatching the whole thing to talk about it with you, I realized there's so many passages from this film that I think about on a very regular basis.
I liked going to that scene specifically. You have Gene Wilder tell this story, specifically of them editing this one scene down, and it's he goes through 4 or 5 phases. And the week after that, it will be a 12-minute okay scene, and by the end. But so Gene Wilder tells this story, and then it immediately goes to Mel Brooks telling a very similar story, but a different one, where he's talking about the final film and taking it to test audiences. And the initial cut was 2 hours. Yeah. And he went out in front of the audience and was like, what you're going to watch is a 2-hour-long, not very good movie. But with your help, it's going to be a 90-minute incredible film. So I liked that this is clearly an idea that Mel Brooks cycle, like thinks about a lot, that he's told this story twice just in the context of Young Frankenstein. I'm sure he does this every time he makes a movie and every time he thinks about editing a scene. And I liked that. I mean, it was an editing choice within this documentary to tell that story twice back to back like that, which I thought was, also, a creative decision that I appreciated. I thought that it really like hammered home that like this is, this editing is what makes, anything. I mean, like, I guess, going back to Mary Shelley, like there, now we have all these like variations of the book published, beyond like the 19 or the 1818 and 1830, like there's published versions of like her handwritten original manuscript, and then we have Percy's notes and her, like, we know editing is important, and editing gets you to a final product you can be proud of. And maybe that speaks to like Victor sort of failing to do that. He makes a monster, brings it to life, and then is like, oh wait, I don't know about this. Like that he failed to take a step back and think and do the editing.
Yes. Oh wow, that's so fascinating. I never considered that, but that does sound pretty. Because another of the quotes that I think about a lot is Kenneth Branagh talking about how the creature is misshapen because he puts it together manically and quickly, and I think, when you're and there's another quote from Margaret Atwood that I love, that I also think about all the time, about like why I'm drawn to this story and film versions of it in particular, where she's like, what is a filmmaker but someone who like stitches together, a reality from nothing and kind of creates. And I think that process is very fascinating for me, like how people put things together. I was just recently listening to you talk about the creation of your book, and I was so taken with the process, like the index cards that you group together by topic, and then that's where the sort of chapters would kind of come out of that, and all of, and that book could have taken any number of forms, but you thought about it very carefully and meticulously, and you did not put it together quickly or manically, and I'm sure that's why it's beautiful and not a monstrosity.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like that's I'm sure this is like somebody else thought of this, but I have a friend who always says has this saying that he says, write drunk, edit sober.
I love that.
And I don't think I wrote any of my book actually drunk, but like I think it's a useful thought to like just get it all out there, and then go back and organize it. But with the note, like I feel like writing that book was very much like a constant, like the editing was happening while the writing, like it was back and forth, I read tons and tons of stuff and had these big stacks, and like I don't even think I knew the format right away. The format came to me fairly quickly, dividing it up by characters, but even still, I mean, like there were points where I started writing and then I was like, oh wait, no, this, and then it was like, okay, now I gotta pull out all the cards. I mean, the stack of index cards is like a foot high. I mean, it's a ton of index cards, and I wrote like at the bottom of each one like roughly what this quote was about, so that I don't have to reread every quote. But like it's like, okay, what are all my quotes about this? And I just pull out the stack and start shuffling through, and okay, now let's move these over here. And it did feel like creating a monster out of parts, and figuring out what part went where and what bones connected to what bones and everything. And I appreciate it. Like, it's interesting to have Margaret Atwood in there, a novelist talking about filmmaking. Obviously there's some similarities in these two creative pursuits, but also some huge differences.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, and I just in the interest of every podcast is potentially someone's first podcast episode. Anthony's book is called The Bride of Frankenstein. It's currently burning a hole in my Amazon list. But I'm curious to know, like, how when was the first time you saw this documentary, and some of your initial sort of thoughts about it?
So I actually, like, I had been a fan of Frankenstein for years, and like I just found like I have this on DVD actually. It's the History Channel put out this DVD that was like destined for bargain bins right away. It has like 3 random like History Channel specials included, this one and 2 others. And yeah, I found it at a, I lived in Tennessee at the time, and it was in a sale bin at no, it wasn't at McKay's. It was, what is that? There was like this little local chain of bookstores or book and movie and video game, that kind of thing. And I was just like, at first I was like, is this a Frankenstein film that I don't know? Like, because it like there's Frankenstein, the true story. And and then I picked it up and I was like, oh no, this is like documentaries. But I was like, sure, whatever. It's like $5 or something. I'll buy it. And I took it home, and like, I think I watched all 3 that, the next day or whatever. And this one definitely stuck out to me more. Like, it felt, in fact, this isn't I can't remember what the main, this isn't the one that's on the cover. But it's definitely the one that's like the most thought out. And yeah, I was definitely like struck by this one. I think it's probably the only one that I've rewatched since initially watching them. I maybe should go back and see if the other 2 are worth talking about. But yeah, it was watching it. It was. I think there were like a couple things where I was like, oh, I don't know what that is, and then I would, it invited me to check out other things, and it felt sort of like, talking to friends about the, just like you move from one time, like there's a few moments in it where the editing is sort of like awkward, and it almost feels like on purpose, where it'll just be like they're talking about this and they're like, oh yeah, also this movie, and then they just move on. They're like, we don't really have enough to say about this, but like we want to mention that we know this movie because it's cool. And then we just move on, and it's like, yeah, that's kind of how it is sometimes when you're just talking with friends. Like, something reminds you of something else, and you're like, okay, have you seen this? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, cool. And then you just talk about something else, and that's it. But you're hanging out with your friends Roger Moore and Eli Wallach.
Right.
It's fun.
Yeah, and it's got an interesting structure. And I think that was one of the first times I really thought about structure in documentaries as a young person, because it opens with Roger Moore speaking, sitting in like a kind of an old-fashioned looking room, like not a leather chair, but it seems like, Masterpiece Theater kind of thing. And he's speaking in his, measured and eloquent way. And then it's also then narrated by Eli Wallach in this kind of cheeky, snarky, I know he didn't write it, but it's kind of an interesting tone to that. And then there are dozens of interviews with, film scholars, literary scholars, clergy. And it's really, really well, like, paced and interwoven. There's some passages that there's the opening itself, before the title is like maybe 90 seconds of just music and pictures. I'm just like, wow, this would never fly today. But and then there's a kind of an extended toy montage with Monster Mash, which I just love that song so much. I don't mind, but that's also a moment where I'm like, whoa. But then it's kind of like structured in where it's like it opens with the 31 movie, then it goes to Mary Shelley, and then it kind of starts to move through the movies more. And so I really appreciate, it's very clearly thought out, like how it's going to unfold, and the narration kind of stitches it together. But there are those moments where it kind of, we're like, oh, that part went nowhere, and now they're just switching gears. But I can't think of another like almost 2-hour documentary though. I'm sure there are some, and if anyone would know, you would. But about Frankenstein, and it's, I don't know, is it even like on YouTube? Can your listeners find it if they didn't snag a VHS or DVD once upon a time?
Yeah, I don't know that it is. I wonder if like like in the streaming age, I don't know if like the History Channel, I think they may own the rights to it or something, or at least they did when my DVD came out. I'll have to try to look around, because this would be something that I, often if something's on Tubi or YouTube or whatever, I often like to kind of throw the link in there to the show notes so that people can find it if they haven't. Because this is fun. Like it's a nice sort of summary of a lot of things. Like it goes roughly chronologically in terms of like how it's talking about the movies at least, but jumps back into Mary Shelley's time a few times. But especially for somebody who's just getting into Frankenstein stuff, I think there's going to be a lot where you're like, oh, what is this one? I don't know this one. And like they just briefly mention like Frankenstein 1970 and Frankenstein Unbound, some movies that are a little less well known. And like the Frankenstein Unbound section, I was not having watched this in a while, I was like, that's interesting that they spend a couple of minutes on that one. They like interview Roger Corman about it a little bit. And like, again, this not being my first watch, but feeling like it because it's been so long, I was like, oh, that's why Roger Corman only ever made, like, he specifically was like, I don't want to make a Frankenstein movie. There's so many and they're all kind of the same. Like he kind of doesn't maybe feel the way we do about them. But then when he stumbled upon the story of Frankenstein Unbound, he was like, oh, this is a new angle. And I appreciate that. Is like, that's, when I watch all of these movies, one of the things I'm doing is like, why did this creator make this movie? What are they trying to tell me by retelling this story that's been retold hundreds of times? And for Roger Corman, he really needed this fresh angle to feel like he had something worth saying. But there are plenty of others that are just like, I'm going to make the most faithful, and then every time that a movie advertises itself as the most faithful, there's always something that's completely not. And that's always the most interesting, because I'm like, why are you saying that you're the most faithful and then you did this? What does this have to say about you as a creator? Because it has to say something. So yeah, I feel like, in this they talk, I think the one that they talk about Frankenstein, the true story, that, it was often billed as being very faithful and is not at all.
Oh gosh, no.
And then, of course, it kind of like this. I think this documentary was produced in conjunction with, Kenneth Branagh's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein coming out, and so obviously the end of the documentary focuses on that a little bit, which again is one that was kind of billed as being super faithful, and does pick up some things that a lot of other adaptations don't, but then also diverts in some big ways, and again, it raises questions as to what Kenneth Branagh had in mind when he decided to, turn Elizabeth into a Frankenstein monster at the end. That's certainly not a thing that happens in Mary Shelley's novel. Yeah,
that's such a huge departure. And that, I think that film too really solidified my, I maybe hadn't, like, I would always rewatch the Universal films and, had the Silvertop series and, but I think that the release of that in November '94, which also was such a delight, a dreary night in November, I think that one, I don't know, that one really kind of set something for me. And actually too, I think it was this documentary in that Margaret Atwood quote about what is a filmmaker, and it transitions to talking about that film and seeing so many of the cast, and I have such an affection for that production. That was actually a bit of a litmus test for me with the Frankencast. I would listen to a handful of ones. I actually started with Terror of Frankenstein, which we can talk about again at some point, but and then I was like, okay, I really hope that they like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because it's a really divisive, I think people have warmed to it more over the years, but I know it wasn't very well liked at the time. But and I was glad, I can't remember, maybe it was you and Erica, I'm not sure who was the co-host, but I was so happy that you seemed to be pleasantly surprised and mostly liked. I'm like, whew, okay, good. But I really studied that film a lot, and I think getting to see it, the behind the scenes in this, there's a wonderful behind the scenes photo book of and published screenplay for that film, but it didn't, I don't know, it's never gotten, it has a nice DVD Blu-ray now, but even it doesn't have a lot of those period interviews. And being familiar with this big photo book, I knew there were tons of them. So this is this documentary is where I got to see a lot of those things. And I think one of the criticisms of that movie is that it's like, I don't know, people making fun of Kenneth Branagh is like, one, got his shirt off and he's doing all the things, and it's like the Kenneth Branagh show. But I think I always sort of, for me, there's an imaginary continuation of the Margaret Atwood quote from this documentary, which is like, what what more perfect, like what bigger narcissist is there than Victor Frankenstein? And so what better way to do the movie is to have somebody who embodies that either intentionally or unintentionally. It just works so well for me. And I think that this documentary really set me up to think of it that way and to think about the connection of the creator and the what they create, even starting with Mary Shelley, and I think that thinking about it more, her 1931 introduction where she talks about the inception of the story is definitely, between that and its loose depiction at the beginning of Bride of Frankenstein, were the first inclinings for me as just like an 7-8-year-old kid of like, oh yeah, people create these stories and they put their experience into them and they come from someplace in the imagination. And I think and I know to this day, that's something I find so fascinating, is like how people translate their feelings and emotions into some kind of creative container. And I think too, that's why I am especially fascinated with adaptations of particularly this book. And I am most interested, I think, in the times when it is especially faithful. And then, yeah, I find the diversions, sort of fascinating and sort of interesting to me, like chronologically going through a lot of the films, I would notice like, oh, here's the first time this happened, or here's the first time this happened, that it must just seep into people's collective consciousness of like, you recently covered is that 1984, that TV version with David Warner?
Yeah. Where
I'm reminded, I think that was probably the first time Justine was sort of the potential body of the aborted bride, which is something in the Branagh film. And I don't know. So I'm sort of fascinated with like how it evolves and how people are adapting for what purposes. And I often wonder, like, did they know that about the 84 film? Was that Steph Lady, or was that Frank Darabont, or was that Branagh? Like, who introduced that? And anyway, I think a lot of the fascination I have with Frankenstein as more than just the Universal film and an original novel really comes from this documentary that I remember watching a lot when it came out. And my VHS is actually an A&E home video. And so I do wonder who has it these days. And the director, Richard Brown, he hasn't done all that much, but yeah, it's just a really treasured film for me. And so, yeah, I'm delighted to be chatting about it with you here today.
Yeah, I think what you were just saying, like, I think the fact that this, Frankenstein, the story is about a creation and everything, and then you have Mary Shelley going back and immortalizing her creative process. I think that's part of the reason that this has lived on so much, is that it's that's so intertwined, and I think people are fascinated by it. Like, she sort of made herself into sort of a celebrity in a way that a lot of like writers from that time are like, we know, like Byron, like his name is probably as well known as hers, but like people generally, like, we know he was kind of a jerk, but like we don't really like unless you are like a Byron super fan. And of course, I guess I am speaking as a Mary Shelley super fan, so like maybe I'm a little skewed, but like I think intertwining her life into her story in this way, I think the creation of the novel Frankenstein is probably the most well-known story about how a book came to be. I just recently read Demon Copperhead. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's a book from a few years back. It won the Pulitzer Prize the year it came out. And it is a retelling of David Copperfield, but told in like Appalachia during the opioid crisis. It's a good and incredibly heartbreaking book, but it made me like revisit David Copperfield, which I hadn't read since I was a kid, just because I wanted to like compare plot points and character names and stuff like that. And reading like the Wikipedia of David Copperfield, I was like, I didn't realize that this is loosely autobiographical about Charles Dickens.
Oh.
Like he experienced a lot of this stuff, but he didn't really mythologize it the way Mary did with her book. So like not being a Charles Dickens scholar, I didn't know it until I read the Wikipedia, and it was just like, yeah, of course everybody is putting their life into their work, but if you're not focusing on finding that stuff, you may not know it unless the author writes a long introduction where they tell you this all, and then it becomes sort of immortalized in the story, which I think is why we get Mary showing up at the beginning of Bride of Frankenstein, and more recently in Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride. Like, we're fascinated with her and how she came to create this story and why. I think I don't know. Like, she doesn't strike me as someone who is like really. I don't think she was intentionally like, this is the thing that will make this immortal. Yeah. Like, it doesn't seem calculated, but it works. Like, it is certainly responsible for like the immortality of this story and our fascination with her and the creation of it.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the as interested as I am in that, I think it as a film fan. Like, there are so many, as this podcast can attest, film versions thereof, and actually so many versions of Mary Shelley's, whether they're the biography films or some of the like loosely, I can think of, I don't know, like 4 at least, like dramatic films based around that summer and the Diodati, like that whole group. And I think this documentary too, like I think is responsible for like creating this filmic version of that could also then expand and live in my head before I saw a lot of those sort of dramatic films. And so it does a really nice job of like sort of period paintings of the people like Byron and Shelley and Claire Claremont. And then also it even goes back to like tells, I think, of how Mary Shelley's parents met and when she would have maybe first glimpsed the poet Shelley from like there's a drawing, I don't know, of her like hiding behind a couch, like listening to the learned people that are populating her father's home. And it like it's really nicely done where it kind of takes you through a biographical sketch of Mary Shelley and these characters. And then also there's like period accurate reviews that are voiced by various actors. So Roger Moore, I think, sometimes will do some of the voices. I was looking at the back of the VHS and was surprised to see it. It says host Roger Moore, narrator Eli Wallach, featuring the voices of first one, Richard Dreyfuss. I never knew that. And all these years I had no idea he provided a voice. And now I wonder, for whom, but yeah, so it's like, it really does a nice job, I think, of, or at least lives large on my imagination of like bringing the context around the creation of the book and the people involved to life, and the reception of the original novel, the receptions of the films as they're coming out, and yeah, it was just like a Frankenstein fan's dream to just kind of get to spend 2 hours in the stew of all this and hearing from all these different scholars and filmmakers and film critics and other writers. It's I don't know, it's really unique in that way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can bring Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks on to like interview them in person and get a lot of creative, but like Mary Shelley not around, but they spent a lot of time going through stuff and then having, dramatized readings of things so that like that felt as like alive and fresh as, the actual creators talking about their things. And it did seem like that was like the focus. Like we get a lot from, stories about James Whale. We get quotes, lots and lots of recordings of like real recordings of Karloff, and then like somebody doing an impression and doing, reading some other quotes from him. We get like Elsa Lanchester. And then as we move forward, they talk about a lot of movies that they just move past. And I think it's because they didn't have a lot, there's not a lot of existing documentation and the creators aren't around. And so we just mention and we move on. But then when we get to like, I think Young Frankenstein and Branagh's Frankenstein are the ones that we spend the most time with, because they were able to get those guys in rooms and talk to them for a while. Yeah. And because that's what we want to hear, is the creators talking about their creations. That's the Frankensteininess of it.
I like that word.
So yeah, we spend a lot of time with those, and I think that's what makes this documentary real. Like, hearing, and especially like, I thought that the Young Frankenstein section was probably my favorite part in there, because we go back and forth between like Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks talking, and sometimes they contradict each other in fun ways, which is like memory, and these things are painting each other, and like I think like Gene Wilder basically is like, yeah, I told him the story, and he was like, that's terrible, I hate it, and then like he's like, no, I thought I was right away. I was like, no, you got something here, so they like they're both telling their side of the story, and obviously they're very charming and like easy to listen to. So that section just was like a lot of fun. And of course, Young Frankenstein is an incredible film. One of my favorite Frankenstein adaptations, even though it is, explicitly like, a satirical comedy, it's still just so loving. And just hearing them talk about it is really a joy.
Yeah, that's one of my that it really does. There's a lot of Young Frankenstein in this documentary, and actually I think the very first interview clip is Mel Brooks, and they come back to him often. Somebody calls it maybe one of the most faithful, which I would not agree with in the slightest, but it is certainly one of the most like beloved and delightful. And every time they would show like a clip from it, I would just want to like stop everything and watch it again. It's such, and I think it's because it has so much heart and so much affection for those old movies that it's, parodying, but also it is kind of telling its own thing. And I often think about what Gene Wilder said of like, he always writes about misfits in search of perfect love. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And I think one of the keys to what people respond to in that film, and there's a lot of great stories too about the making of it, about him going like 45 minutes blue in the face arguing for the putting on the Ritz dance scene. I think about that all the time too, where, not to spoil the story, but he's telling this in this argument, Mel Brooks doesn't think he should include it. And then he just, after 45 minutes, he's like, all right. He's like, wait, what? I've just been like arguing until I'm blue in the face. Why did you change your mind? He's like, well, I wasn't sure. And I was like, if you fought hard enough for it, then I knew it was right. So all of these things are like stuck in my young head about, and I'm trying to, I'm having this collaboration with this, person that I'm trying to work on my film with, and my film has a lot of first person voiceover, and we're like a couple sessions into working together when I realize, and she reveals to me that she is just opposed to that. She's like, voiceovers for people who don't trust their audience. I'm just like, oh my God. But I've been literally trying to gear up to like, am I going to have to just like go 45 minutes arguing for this just for her to be like, all right, I guess I just needed to know that it was important to you. But I think about things like that from this documentary just all the time. And I think it just like, I don't know, they capture such lively quotes and stories from the people that are alive. That with the Branagh film, the interviews, I believe, are from the set. People are in costume, and that's really fun. And I think they talked to Jane Seymour, is that right? About Frankenstein, the true story, and she reveals that she is a Frankenstein somewhere in her lineage, and a lot of unexpected thing. I think it's like the first time I saw Forrest Ackerman and his place. It really introduced to me the whole kind of world around this, and also it takes you through the films of the Universal films in a way where I've thought about this over the years too. I think those Universal films were my first introduction to any kind of like chronological type progression of a story like people would have maybe encountered in reading comic books. I think for me, like reading the Crestwood House books and all of that, I was like, oh, look how these characters continue. And I don't know, it's the first I heard about like once they got to Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, they are like, oh, maybe, well, Chaney just played the monster, but he can't because he's the Wolfman. So who are we going to get now? It's like, that's when they got Bella. But and in the previous movie, Bela Lugosi's Igor's brain was put in the head of the monster, and then he was speaking in the voice, but it was too weird, and so they took it out. And so all of this sort of intrigue is like is sort of detailed pretty quickly as they move like through a survey of these movies. And yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that it was the first time I saw like a glimpse of Gothic, the Ken Russell movie, and there's still one, that claymation one. I've seen this.
Yes,
I'm just. Do you know that movie? Because I was like, I got to find this.
Yeah, that like this is one that they mentioned like for 1 second, and then they move on, and I was like, I haven't seen this. Right. I forgot about it from the last time I watched it, since it's just such a quick thing, and I was like, I got to track that down. That looks really fun. Yeah, because they describe it as like that it's like fine art. Yes. It's like a weird claymation, and I'm like, okay, yes, I am so in for that. Yeah. I also was kind of struck by that, like, so, you know, growing up watching, you know, the Universal films, like, at the time I was just watching whatever one showed up on cable, you know, out of order, not really anything in particular, just, and then when I got a little older, I bought that like Universal DVD box set that's like, you know, there's all the Frankensteins, all the Draculas, all the mummies, all in this big box, and then, you know, I was like, I sat down and like over a weekend watched all the Frankensteins, and like, when you do it that way, like, it feels like here's a thing that was planned out the same way that, like, you know, whatever series, the Hunger Games or Harry Potter or whatever, like that. Yeah. But then, you know, when I remember, like, in fact, I think I had just, like, I had watched all of them for the first time in several years because I'd gotten that box set, and then found this documentary in the bargain bin soon after, and, like, you know, sat down and watched it, and it was like, hearing them talk about like, oh yeah, they made Frankenstein, it did well, so they decided to do The Bride. It did well, but then Universal kind of fell apart because of a lot of factors, and it was years that went by, and that was it. It was just Frankenstein and The Bride, and then there was this resurgence, and thinking about that, like, this wasn't a guarantee that this whole thing was going to happen, and the way that, like, you know, long spans of time between them would go by, and then, you know, like, even to the fact that, like, they brought Karloff back for a third after, I mean, it was like almost a decade had gone by, you know, and it's just like, that's wild that like, it just feels like it's so of a piece, and it is not, like it, and which I guess is sort of Frankenstein-y in and of itself, right? Like we're pulling these pieces together as we can find them, as we've got the time and the money and the interest. And yeah, so that was really, the first time I watched this, I remember being really struck by that like, oh wow, this happened very differently than like if you sit down and binge them all together and feel like it's one long, you know, story. Which, yeah, I thought that was a really cool thing to kind of spend some time with. They, you know, that's one of the first sort of like sections, is they like really go into how all of these, you know, then we did this, and you know, it did well, so we decided, what if we added another monster to the story?
Yes.
And, you know,
I loved all that, and that, I think about that a lot too, that re-release in 38 or whatever, where there was just that, like, that theater that was, I don't know, they just needed something to show, or decided to program Frankenstein and Dracula 31 together, and there were lines around the block, and then Universal ended up, you know, putting it out nationally and starting, you know, with Son of Frankenstein. And I think a lot of the Hollywood lore that they get into in the making of these films is really fun, and there's something about like that like group of people, you know, like the fact that I know like Polidori's name and Claire Claremont and all who were there that summer, and that I feel sort of similarly about a lot of like the people around the Whale films, and have such affection for everybody from Colin Clive and Dwight Fry to, you know, Ernest Thesiger and all of those people, to where that when they pop up in other films, or even learning about like was it Charles Laughton was married to Elsa Lanchester, and like just that I don't know, this kind of like group of people that were making stuff together, and I'm sure they made many things, and probably maybe aren't thrilled that they're remembered for this as they, you know, aged. But I also think too, like, about, I think it's Peter Bogdanovich it does the Karloff imitation when he asks him about like, how do you feel about it? He's like, the monster, well, I'm very grateful to the monster, he's gave me a career. And I think about that a lot too. It's like I'm realizing that a lot of these behind the scenes stories like are really sort of foundational in the way that I think about making movies in general and how movies get made and the the people involved with them and how their personalities inform things. And then as that would like deepen over the years, they're still realizing, like, I don't remember where it might have been. So the title of this is not great for the internet, right? Like, It's Alive, the true story of Frankenstein. Like, there's at least, I don't know, there's a Greg Menk book called It's Alive. There's the Julian David Stone, is it the novel about sort of, this is what might have been, like a historical fiction about the making of that 31 film. So I'm trying to think, and then they got Frankenstein, the true story, which of course there's the TV movie and all that. And so it's a little tough to like parse through all these things. But I'm wondering too, in that soup of all of the It's Alives and Frankenstein behind the scenes, where I heard even just more recently about like Colin Clive, like maybe he was part of what he bonded with Whale over was being gay in Hollywood. I was like, whoa, I didn't, so it's like, there's still so much more intrigue that like this surface level thing that's in this film, I've wanted to like dig deeper on over the years. And I still collect editions of Frankenstein and books about it. And I've got a whole like bookshelf dedicated to it. But sometimes I look at it and I'm just like, I never really read that book, or, it's just like, there's a world of interest for me. And then like the people involved in these projects. And I think a lot of that really stems to the way that the particular documentary was put together. And I don't, seeing first time like Rick Baker outside of, the making of Thriller and that, where like you see how he recreated the laboratory and his house or something. And he recreated the Frankenstein monster and tells us how all that happened. And yeah, it's just kind of rich with those kind of, just sort of builds out, like it talks about everybody from Jack Pierce through like Rick Baker and Jack Pierce's own sort of words. It really gives you a sense of a lot of different angles of the people that were involved in making this story as indelible as it is in all these different mediums.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, like, again, saying that, like, it feels like hanging out with friends who are into the same thing you are, and like, seeing that, like, these people that, Rick Baker, he's done incredible stuff. Like, I love so many things he's been involved in, inspirational, and then seeing him and being like, oh yeah, he's also a monster kid like me. He did the things that I love because he before that loved other things that I also happen to love. But like, I mean, that whole section where they talk about Strickfaden stuff, like, which is really fascinating. And then going into like, he met Strickfaden and whereas Mel Brooks borrowed the stuff and returned it and everything, Rick Baker just like, being a creative weirdo, like spent time, like figured out like, okay, what is this, how does this work, and then he went home and he made it all, and that's crazy. That's so cool. And like, and not only is it cool that he did it, but like he knows it's cool. Like when he's having so much fun talking about that to the cameraman, to whoever's there, and he's just like, now check this out, like, and he's like, get ready, there's gonna be a big flash here, and he flips a switch, and he's like, he's so excited about it, and that's it's infectious. And like, of course he goes on to be a creature creator himself, because he watched all these things and was fascinated, how did they do it, and he's trying to figure it out. And like, the creativity is sort of a bug that gets passed on. You decide to create because there are things that spoke to you and you want to continue the conversation. And I think this feels like it really is sort of like highlighting that, like, here's all these people that and love, and that they've gone through this process as well. Like it feels like a call to like, go out and create something, do something yourself.
Wow. Boy, you're really unpacking something that I think is some of why this was so central for me, because it was hearing all of these stories that the people went through of like, these titans, Gene Wilder and all that, like, and Mel Brooks saying like the 2-hour failure that'll be an hour and a half success. I think I literally said that in a work in progress screening myself for that exact equation of 2 hours, 90 minutes, and even back to like, to knowing that Mary Shelley, when they were having that ghost story, she would have to wake up, morning after morning, or like face the group and say like, I don't have anything yet. I think he really hit on something that I never really realized for myself, which was that hearing the making of all of these things that I loved and hearing from the people involved and the struggles that they went through was a call to action for me. I think that like, oh yeah, there will be challenges, but you can kind of see them through and create something that is satisfying to you. And I think that was probably really huge for me, because I'm realizing this was right around, so this was 94. I was probably like 15, and just seeing independent movies and all that and getting a taste of like, oh, this is like, you don't have to be born to it or grow up in LA. You can just like make a thing, and maybe it'll find an audience, and even if it doesn't, you'll have a great time doing it. And I think that there's a lot of that in this film that I never really realized before. Thank you.
Yeah, I also being from the Midwest, I feel like there's a lot of people do kind of feel like, well, I can't do it. And, I don't live in New York or LA. I'm not, no one's ever going to see the thing that I'm making. And one that has led me to be very, very like passionate about things that other people have made from areas near me. Like I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and there's a few like very influential bands that have come out of our town, and like I feel very like fond of them, like I'm protective of them, because they did it. They worked hard and they like got recognized outside of our town. And meanwhile, like a lot of I think that this podcast is probably the thing that I've done that is heard by people outside of my like circle more than anything else I've ever done. But like there's so many other creative projects that I've done over the years that like I sort of explicitly I'm like, I'm gonna make this thing and nobody's ever gonna see it or hear it, like, and I'm okay with that. Like you said, it's the making of it is the reward. Having that end result that you're proud of, that's enough of a reward. And if one person connects to it, that's a huge bonus. And if it goes beyond that, even more so. But yeah, I think never forgetting that like actually just the making of the thing is worth it, is really important to me. And I think that's definitely something that they hit over and over again, in this documentary.
I just realized that is literally what the documentary I've been making for 11 years is about. This is no wonder. I'm glad we're doing this.
Welcome to therapy.
Yeah. Frankenstein therapy. There should be such a thing. Oh, goodness.
I feel like over the years of doing this has definitely been therapeutic for me. So I hope that it has helped other people see some things in themselves as they go. But yeah, like I think obviously the creating is important, and talking about it and thinking about it, and spending time with things that are important to you and figuring out why. I think these are all incredibly healthy things to do for you, like emotionally, spiritually, however you want to think of it. That like, not, that's again going back to like why Frankenstein is like thinking about why is this important to me is beneficial. Like sometimes you will learn a good thing about yourself that you never really acknowledged, and sometimes you'll learn like, oh yeah, I'm processing something negative that happened to me using this, and that's also positive. Mm-hmm. Like kind of finding that and accepting it, and it kind of like helps you take the next step forward. So yeah, it is kind of therapy for sure.
Yeah. And I think the documentary actually does take some time. I think it really is trying to sort of unpack too. And it's not just giving you a history, but it is examining a little bit like why Frankenstein, why does this story resonate? And you're hearing from all of these sort of different voices, whether they be, clergy or, critics or scholars or, filmmakers or writers. And I think they're all kind of giving their own take on that and unpacking it in a semi-therapeutic way. And the movie has got, you mentioned it's like hanging out with friends. And I think now, in the days before there were podcasts, I would often put on like a film commentary or something like that. And I'd love to hear people talk about like movies and creative works. And I would listen to interviews and stuff with people. And I think this has that, but it also has such a jovial nature to it's got its serious portions, and Roger Moore handles most of that, but from the Eli Wallach kind of snarky narration to, the first interview clip you see is with Mel Brooks, and almost every time you see Mel Brooks, you hear, I think, the director or producer interviewing him kind of laughing along with him, which is easy to imagine, if you're in his presence, how it would be hard not to just kind of fall in with his energy and everything. But there is that, and they sort of, the way that these dozens of interviews are woven together, stitched to make it Frankenstein-y, they're in conversation with each other. And it is kind of picking up where another person left off and sort of kind of the snowball of like passion and interest. I think, I don't know if he originally said this, but I always heard Kevin Smith say like interested is interesting. And these are all people like super interested in Frankenstein. And also, and then one of the reasons I was so keen to reach out to you and try to be a part of this is like, I found, thankfully through the internet, like ways to kind of connect with people around some of my other shared or some of my other solo passions that I didn't know other people in my real life or daily life that I would see in person to get to talk about them with. And I think this was like a thing early on of like probably one of the first times, other than maybe like Star Wars documentaries you'd see on TV or something, but those would always be like shorter. Maybe there's that hour one, but in any event, I think this is one of the first times I saw a documentary organized around something that I was just generally interested in. And so to hear and just to know that there's all these different people this excited about this story from this many different angles was energizing to me, and also just made me feel less strange and alone. And so I think that's another reason why it was so formative for me. Yes. Yeah. Which, I mean, I feel like goes back to like why I decided to do this podcast in the first place, was just like, I wanted to find that. I wanted to, I listened to a lot of podcasts and I was like, surely somebody's doing this. And then I was like, well, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make this thing for people like me. And, hopefully it finds the audience and the community kind of forms. And, I just like, I get emails from people who are just like, they're like, hey, are you guys going to do this movie? And like they maybe aren't, depending on like, the way you reached out and like really kind of like told me a lot about yourself was really cool. And then I just get some that are just like, hey, I like this movie and I hope you talk about it at some point. And that's as much as they want to reach out, and that's cool. And I'm like, yes, now that you say that, that sounds like we did the recent Tron movie because somebody emailed us and was just like, I don't know if you've seen this, but it's kind of a Frankenstein. And I was like, I kind of had skipped it because I had heard not great things, but sure, I'll look at it and look at it through that lens. And sure enough, like doing that, I appreciated it more than I ever would have had I just like, watched it because it was on streaming and I was bored or something. Yeah. I hope that the person who reached out, like, that episode, like that they were like, yeah, I helped do that. And I hope that, however people want to engage with this, I hope that they're getting something out of it. And that feels like sort of continuing this, I'm certainly not, Rick Baker or Mel Brooks or anything, but like, I hope that the conversation is continuing here. I don't think there's anyone who has done like hundreds of, you've got a very specific niche, if only for the depth and breadth of what you've done here. And the only reason I'm, I guess, glad to have found it so late in terms of when it started is that I have such a wealth of like a back catalog to enjoy, and the Patreon too is just like a treasure trove. I'm just like, he reads the Crestwood House books. There's one of those like a kids adaptation that I think you read, that more than anything too is the illustrations from that version. I just like live rent free in my head, and there's some of the creepiest renderings that rival some of them, the Bernie Rice and stuff, which incidentally, like in this documentary that we're talking about, that's the first I ever saw anew of the Bernie Wrights in illustrations. It's the first time ever that I saw the Frankenstein monster in color, or maybe anybody did, because there's that Karloff family footage from the set of Young Son of Frankenstein, where Boris Karloff's kind of clowning with Jack Pierce and pretending like he's going to punch him. But they literally say in the documentary, like, no one has ever seen this till now. Or there's the promo with Karloff and Lugosi, probably from like around the filming of The Raven, I'm guessing, where they're kind of doing like some kind of promo spot for like a Hollywood parade or something. But they start out as like, you see like Lugosi looking like Dracula, like he normally does, but he says like, "I'm ready, Frankenstein," talking like Igor, and it's like, I don't know if you come across this now, and it's so hard for me to sometimes understand or like kind of connect in my old man brain that all of these things that for me were just like took so much, effort of like seeing this thing on TV and then trying to find. I have so many, like I'm wearing a As Seen on VHS shirt because I just like, that's what I felt like at the time, like this sort of not archivist, but like you would have to go out and like go to all kinds of different video stores, especially if you lived in a small area, to try to find some of these movies. And I just accumulated so much minutia and knowledge about Frankenstein that nowadays, someone who's like 8 years old and like can just Google something and see it all on YouTube instantaneously. I think there's something about something like this that like if there was an annotated version of this documentary, it was just like there's so many things that I saw for the first time to then go out and seek out and see the full, get the full experience. And there's that one, I gotta find the name of that both of us were like, what is that? That claymation one where I still haven't seen it.
I just looked it up. It's called Walpurgis Nacht, or
Okay.
Walpurgis Night.
Yes.
Not Walpurgis Nacht. But apparently it looks like it may be like a lost film, which I'm gonna have to dig more into it, but
that's a shame.
It looks like, I don't know if it was ever finished, but there's clips around. I'm gonna have to see whatever I can find of it. We will talk about it. Whatever we can find about it, we'll
Excellent.
we'll get on Patreon and talk about that. It looks like it probably is at most a short film. So, but yeah, I'm very curious, and yeah, we've got to watch that. But yeah, I mean, like, I feel like we keep kind of going back to like the longevity of it, and I think that's as the documentary ends, I feel like it really kind of brings everything together, where it says like, what would Mary Shelley think, looking at all these things we've been talking about for the past 2 hours, like what would Mary Shelley's response to Frankenhooker be? But I like. She may recognize Branna's monster more than she would recognize Karloff with the big square head, but like I think she would I think the spirit of her story being told in all these different ways, I think she'd be I mean, like we know that like even Presumption that came out while she was alive and that changed things a lot, she thought it was great. She thought it was super cool that like somebody was taking her story and building on it. So I think she'd be just tickled at the way that her monster has continued to live on hundreds of years later and in all these different ways. And yeah, I think he says like, what would Mary think of how her stories lived on, and what could we tell her about how it's affected us? And I mean, I think again, that's I feel like that's the central idea of this podcast is like looking at how her story keeps living on, and it's sort of all a letter to her to talk about how much it's affected us. So which is one of the reasons that it's been fun to have different people on. Like me and Eric kind of started this and really kind of like spent a lot of time analyzing the variations and stuff, and like that's all been very fun. But like, yeah, getting other perspectives and hearing other people talk about how things matter to them, and like running into getting a chance to talk to Don Glut early on, and then connecting with Tim Kirk has been like one of the coolest things about this podcast. I know you kind of talked about that a little bit when we were emailing that, like, and I still we had scheduled this recording, and then yesterday Tim like texted me and was like, hey, I could do another couple movies sometime soon.
That's great.
You got a few. And I was just like, it's so cool that like Tim Kirk is texting me like, hey, let's do this again. Like, so it's absolutely bizarre that things have kind of like happened like this, but yeah, it's cool. It's going back to it's about talking to your friends about things that you're both excited about, and when you find those people that get it, that like love the things you love and are passionate about them in the same way that you are, you want to hold on to it because it's really special.
Yeah, it really is. I remember so I actually reached out to Tim Kirk years ago. I mean, he would never remember this, but because I am a particular fan of The Terror of Frankenstein, like the actual, the short, it's not a short film, but it's like a less than 90-minute adaptation. So when I learned of the Terror of Frankenstein director's commentary that he made, I was too late to get it. So I think I reached out and just saying like, look, I'm a huge fan of this thing, and did you know this and that about that production and whatever, something obnoxious. But I think he graciously shared with me some sort of private Vimeo link at the time so that I could check it out. And then that was among the first things that I just found in your feed. And then when I was like, oh, they're coming back to like have these reoccurring discussions about this, that, and the other, and it's such a beautiful little world you've built here for us outcasts interested in this story.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to like officially bring you into the fold. I think when you gave me that list, and I was like, let's do this one. This sounds like it might be a fun intro. And we'll see how it goes from there. But like, I think obviously we're going to continue talking. We're going to want to like dig into some more like, like specific stories and get into plots and stuff. Like I think this was a great idea that we could just kind of like, chat and kind of like talk about things that we're interested in and why we keep going back to these movies and stuff. But I'm definitely looking forward to more episodes in the future with you, where we'll get more in depth on specific films and stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, and speaking of creations and being inspired, like obviously we kind of hinted earlier, like I was aware of your work before you reached out because
sorry.
I'll mention this just I know, like, not to embarrass you too much, or like, so when you're like, I feel like was it around COVID that Lunch Meat like did the VHS release of Inertia?
Yeah, so we can cut this out, but I am so curious how you found out about this, and obviously I'm sure most of your listeners have no idea what we're referring to. But
well, yeah, let's talk about it. Like if they haven't, they should check this out. So like that was I found out about your so when you were, was it like high school or college? I mean, it was
high school. 14 in 1994. I was in May 94. I was about to turn 15, I guess. I saw The Crow starring Brandon Lee, and I was very taken with that film and probably shouldn't have been able to see it or whatever, but I did. And I saw it at this like packed screening. Like I'm from a small town in northeastern Ohio, like a suburb of Cleveland, and I had never encountered like going to a movie that was sold out before. And so we tried to go to opening night of that film. It was sold out at the 7:00 show. My dad's like trying to take me and my friend to it. So we had to drive, I don't know, like not quite an hour, but like kind of far away to get to like another screening of it like at 9 o'clock, which I don't know, I wasn't accustomed to going to movies that late at that age, but it was wild. Like it was, again, it would ultimately be sold out, but we were able to get tickets before, but there were people sitting all the way up the aisles. I'd never seen, so people not familiar with The Crow, it's like a guy wearing black trench coat and white makeup with like kind of a sinister mime visage type thing. And there was like, there was like one person there who had half their face painted up this way. And it's the first time I think I smelled pot, even though I didn't know that was what that was. And there's all these leather jackets and like kind of scary looking people for me as a kid from a small town. And then there was the loudest movie I'd ever been to. And then people were sitting all the way up the aisles of it. Anyway, all that after the movie was over, this guy stood up from the front row and he just goes, "That movie sucked." And everybody was just like, "What?" Because everybody was cheering as the guy, it's a revenge tale as he was killing all the people who wronged him and his fiance and all this. So everyone was just like aghast, like, "Is it bad?" And he's like, the comic book is better. You can get it at my comic store. And he gives an address. But I don't think I went to that particular comic store, but I did seek out the graphic novel and I read it in one sitting. It scared me and excited me. And my friend who and I were making like action movies together in our backyards. We're like, he's like, "We should do a version of this." And I thought he was nuts, but I was excited at the possibility. And we started shooting things and it was terrible, but we kind of kept at it and we did our best to like film it from the panels of the book as best we could over the next 4 years. And so we called it James O'Barr's The Crow, very literally a nod to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and Bram Stoker's Dracula and all that kind of stuff. And, it was just on home video and early days of the internet. We finished in like 1998 and I just sent emails to people who ran like Crow fan sites. So I'm still, all these years later, I'm just like finding somebody who loves what I love and be like, "Hey, I love this too. Would you want to see this thing I made?" And so I made like 100 copies of it on VHS and I shared it with the people who were interested, who were in the movie, and like made a cover. I couldn't even, I remember like I was on a Pearl Jam mailing list, or what did you call them, listserv or something like that. It wasn't like a chat board, but it was like through AOL or some crazy, but like this lady in New Zealand who had graphic design skills, who was making like compilation covers that I would help her like get I'd source the CDs and like put together all the outtakes and I'd make the tape and she'd make the cover. I'd be like, "Hey, I made this movie. Would you make the cover that looks like the comic book?" And anyway, so this is the kind of like really homegrown situation. Yeah. And I sent them around but it became over the years, like as early as like 1999 or 2000, like I bought a bootleg copy of it on eBay because I was like, I got to see what this is like and how bad it looks and everything. But it's gone on to be a weird like cult within the cult within a cult movie of like shot on video. And my friend who made it with me filmed behind the scenes a lot throughout, as I was just kind of like single-mindedly going about. This might be also why I have a lot of sympathy for Brandon, because I was the main character and the director of this thing. But so anyway, he filmed all this stuff. Long story long, like we eventually made a documentary out of it that like played one time at a film and video festival in New York City in like 2002, never to be seen of again until the good people at Lunch Meat Home Video put it out on tape, and then I remastered the movie from the original tapes, the adaptation, which they put up on YouTube. So you somehow saw this. I gotta know, like, how did you come across it? Why did you see
so it was when Lunch Meat released it, like I don't social media or something, like I just like popped up like them promoting it or whatever, and I was like, I've never seen this adaptation, but this sounds really cool. Like I love people making stuff, just trying their best with what little resources they have. This sounds like a fascinating story. So I just like kind of sight unseen, like ordered the VHS, and like you said, like part of the thing was like they just, I think probably for rights reasons and such, like just put the adaptation up on YouTube. So like by the time the VHS arrived, I'd already seen the adaptation and was like even more excited to get it. And yeah, I just was like, this is so cool. And it was like I was aware of The Crow as like I'd seen the Brandon Lee movie, but I had not read the comic. I read the comic after having watched your adaptation of it. and was like, yeah, this is really good. Like this is great. So yeah, I thought it was really cool, and it was it was during COVID where it was just like I was sitting around watching movies like all the time, like I was working from home and like just spent some time with it, and like yeah, I thought it was really great. So when you reached out, I was like, wait, that's him. Okay, wow, that's really cool. So yeah, it was exciting.
That is wild. I mean, to my knowledge, there's only 100 copies of that VHS, like the Inertia one. They did like a 50 tape run, and now I think they're still having trouble selling out of the final 50 from the second pressing. But just the idea that you were familiar with it, that you had one of those, is unreal. And I guess destined that we're to be Frankenstein pals.
yeah, it worked out. So I know you said you're working on something now. I guess I don't know if that's in range of you wanting to kind of like talk about it yet, or do you have anything else that you want to like promote as we're getting here to the end of this one?
Oh gosh, no, not to like promote, but I suppose I got to get used to talking about this new project. So I fell into what I now know to be like an actual subgenre of documentary called personal documentaries, where like the person making it is also in it because of this crow thing. I was editing it at a cable access center, and then there was in the like late 90s, and there was this guy I would come in before they closed and edit overnight and stuff. And so there was this guy that I guess was a fan of The Crow, and he wanted to do a documentary about The Crow, but obviously without rights to anything or whatever. But he ended up using our adaptation as a kind of anchor for this. And so he sat me and my friend down for these long, like dramatically lit interviews. And eventually he lost interest in that project. And I had all this behind the scenes footage and interviews. So I like wove it together into something. But that started a pattern for me of like kind of processing my life, the things that I made through either finishing or eventually even starting documentaries kind of where I was at the heart of them. And I think some of that is to be unpacked in therapy forever, but some of it too is just like, I don't know, like I wanted to make movies and I was the person I had access to or whatever. But yeah, I was a musician, solo singer songwriter. That was my central focus from age 25 but age 25 to 35, I was really focused on that. And, as I was I'd made 3 albums, and I was like, 35, 36 years old. And that third one wasn't happening like I'd hoped, but I had sat down to make a behind the scenes video or something, some kind of promotional thing. I had someone interview me that was familiar with my past work. And she asked us on like a Zoom before Zoom, and on camera though, like, how do you keep putting so much of yourself and energy into this music and trying to get it out in the world without any realistic hope of, being like a famous rock star? And I was surrounded by like some bandmates and stuff, and none of us knew how to answer that question. And I ended up spending the next 11 years trying to answer it through a film and this insane archive of like creative work that never really found an audience. And so in a way, it's like a bizarre sequel to that Inertia documentary, except for rather than being focused on the creation of a movie that was already adapted from a comic book by like master craftsman as a teenager, this was me like trying to figure out how to express myself and really exploring like why I need to express myself through art. And also I'm my last name is Ullman, spelled like Tracy, not like the famous Ullman brothers, but I have a brother whom I make music with, and our dad made music with his brother as far back as high school. So at a certain point, there were 2 generations of these Ullman brothers making music. So it's a little bit of a family story, and they grew up deaf, they grew up parents of my grandparents were deaf. And so my dad and his brother started this garage band and stuff when the Beatles hit in the 60s. And so it's sort of interesting that they, maybe growing up the way they didn't have the greatest communication skills. And so the men in our family maybe, and also this is maybe a gendered thing, don't have as strong of like communication skills as would be nice, especially around sensitive or emotional topics. But we always connected through music, which is can be like super vulnerable, especially if you're writing lyrics and all this kind of stuff. And so it explores both like how one carries a creative enterprise or discipline throughout their life as like kind of things change and your relationship to it has to change. And then also a bit about like how people kind of connect through creativity. And so the film is called The Furious Light, and it'll be some time, I think, before folks can see it, but I think just this summer, I'm going to start to do some audience building around it to where we're like sharing. I think we're going to start up a podcast called The Furious Light, where we talk to people, musicians at first, but perhaps all kinds of creative people, about their experience, kind of, you know, having creativity be such an important part of your life, even when it might not be your career. And so anyway, I don't have a great concise way of talking about it yet, obviously, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to try. And I suppose if folks want to kind of follow that, you can find me online, davidullman.net, or also on Instagram. And soon there will be a Furious Light Instagram page and podcast as well. But obviously, you got to catch up first on many hundreds of hours of the Frankencast and the Patreon, which I'm now just diving into before you get to that. That's the rules. I don't make them, but I follow.
Well, I'm excited to kind of get in here on the ground floor and this project. Like I'm looking forward to. It sounds like obviously you've been spending a lot of time past 11 years, but like as it starts becoming a more publicly facing thing, I'm definitely interested to continue to talk about it with you. So
thank you very much.
I'm glad that we ran into each other at this time. I think it feels like serendipity.
Certainly does. I'm so grateful for this connection and for all the work that you and your podcast co-hosts have done these past so many years.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think unless that's all I've got to say about the documentary, unless you have anything else to add, I guess we'll I'll do our plugs. You can find us on all the socials at the Frankencast. You can email us at thefrankencast@gmail.com and see what can happen if you email us. Who knows? And we're also, as David said, we're also over on patreon.com/thefrankencast, where there's, as many episodes as there are in the main feed, there's almost that many again over on Patreon. So there's plenty more material over there if you haven't checked it out. And there's free trials, and there's all kinds of ways you can check some of it out in advance and see if it's for you. So yeah, we'd absolutely love to have you over there. And as far as next week, I think actually, as I kind of hinted, I've been talking to Tim, so I think Tim Kirk's going to be back next week. I believe we are going to be talking about Monstrosity, a movie by Andy Milligan, who was also a kind of weirdo with a low budget who just made movies on his own. And it's one that I've seen quite a few Andy Milligans, but I've not seen this one, so I'm excited to check it out. So yeah, Tim and I will be talking about that next week, and I'm looking forward to it. But until then, to be continued.
Looks like you made it through another episode. Looks like you've survived another episode. The Frankencast is a production of FCR Media. It's hosted by Anthony Bowman, Eric Velasquez, and Hayden Orr. Follow us online at The Frankencast, or send us a letter at thefrankencast@gmail.com. Our cover art is by Amanda Keller. You can find her at Keller Illustrations on Instagram. Our theme music is by Vivek Abhishek. Thanks for listening.